Hi, welcome to the Tuesday Night Big Book Study Workshop of the Program of Recovery. This is Keystone Group. We've been happening online for a while now to be of service. My name's Tony Roberts. I've been sober through the course of action since 1989 and continuous sobriety as the result of the application of these things that got me connected to something greater than myself that removed the problem. Ray's not feeling well tonight, so if you keep him in your prayers and thoughts, that'll be great. I'm honored to be able to fill in for him. It's been a while since I've been here on a Tuesday, but I'm glad to be here, glad to be able to do this. I'm a little tired. I've been working really a lot of hours, so, bear with me. If I'm not kind of a little off base here, kind of pray for me, and we'll all get through this together, right? So, we're on how it works. Probably the most read piece of literature in Alcoholics Anonymous, and probably the most misunderstood, right? Because a lot of people, the guys who 12-step me, they conned me into a big book study, right? I didn't see the benefit of it, right? I was 11 years in and out, trying to get sober through the 12 and 12, and it really isn't designed for alcoholics like myself to get sober through. Right, that's what the basic text is for. If you've been through this, you kind of understand who put this together and why they put it together. And it's a format put together for people who are afflicted with this illness that placed them beyond human aid, where other methods failed utterly, right? And it kind of started, the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous, I believe, started when the doctor witnessed this thing happening in his town's hospital with one of the co-founders, which we understand, Bill, who was going to his facility for the third time, right? And as Bill was going to this treatment center for the third time, this doctor already pre-diagnosed this person as beyond human aid, of the hopeless variety, chronic, right? Beyond the scope of him being able to help, right? And they talked about that in the doctor's opinion, where people like us, his methods failed utterly. So if his method would have worked with people like us, then the big book would be called Dr. Silkworth's Plans of Recovery, right? So if you bear with me for a second, so these people who were going through his facility, a lot of his methods worked. How many people have been through the doctor's opinion? And they talk about his methods worked for most people, but he was never successful with an alcoholic of our description, right? And so as we go through this, a lot of people who sit in meetings who haven't been through the previous chapters, 4 previous chapters, the forwards, doctor's opinion, and the spiritual appendix in the back of the book, would be really hard-pressed in explaining how it works. Right, they'd be giving their ideas or what they think it means. It's like how many people, when they were new, sat in a meeting as they were reading how it works, wondering how it works. I wonder how this works, right? And a lot of us get in conflict with a lot of the information we hear because we think we're arguing with the information, but really we're arguing with ourselves. And it's usually lack of information that has us in kind of contempt or kind of preconceived ideas. And so when we get to how it works, we've covered a lot of information, right? And so when you get to, this is kind of important here. So a lot of this stuff probably you hear for the first time, you might have a little bit of a hard time with what's being presented, but it's all book-based, right? And so after this meeting, we'll have a little discussion. If you want to write something down, you want to challenge a thought or an idea that's being presented in the book, by all means, let's do that. We'll spend time doing that question and answer period after the meeting. I'll make myself available, and hopefully we could kind of squash some of this confliction that we're having. So on page 44, it talked about here, there's a shift in conversation, right? Everybody got their book, page 44? Kind of first paragraph, in the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. So we've seen the purpose of the preceding chapters. It was what? For us to learn something about alcoholism, right? And I look this as kind of questionnaire, even though it's not a question, it's kind of question, right? Have I learned something in the preceding chapters in regards to alcoholism? Yes or no, right? We hope we've made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and non-alcoholic. Have they done that? Yes, right? So by this stage of the game, I should have a good understanding what type of alcoholic I am, right? Am I a part of the collective? That's the whole design of this thing, because as we were going through more about alcoholism, they were talking about how should we help our readers to determine to their own satisfaction whether they're one of us or not. Page 34, right? And so as you go through the symptoms of alcoholism, we see that there's only two symptoms in alcoholism, which is conflicting to a lot of information you hear in meetings and a lot of main speakers, circuit speakers. They have kind of a different spin on it because a lot of them are treatment center based. But if you're kind of big book based, there's only two symptoms in alcoholism: the physical component, which we understand is the allergy, and the malady, as outlined on page 23, is the main problem of the alcoholic that centers in the mind. And then they go on to explain this thing as a phenomenon, an unexplainable event that happens for people like us that places us beyond human aid, right? And then they go all the way through this thing. They've always talked about the spiritual component as the solution, never as the problem yet. Right? It's always been the solution to our dilemma in step one, the baffling feature of alcoholism, this condition that centers in the mind. And right from the doctor's opinion, they kind of said, for people who are like this, who put this book together, right? So there's a group of people that those methods didn't work for. They all got together and kind of put their collective experience together, and they kind of put together what it looks like to have this condition, and the solution that they found and what it looked like when they went through it, right? And so it's pretty hard to describe these photos, but this is what it looks like. If you have this condition, we understand the phenomenon of craving. Anybody get thirstier here when they drink? Anybody thinking about the next drink before they finish the first drink? Anybody thought the night that they didn't get in trouble was a successful night of drinking, right? So it changes the idea, the shift from external conditions to an internal condition, right? The shift goes, there's something happening inside of me at certain times where I can't see the danger in what I'm about to do, thus relapse. So you hear people say, I've never relapsed. Well, either you don't understand the term they're using that in, or you haven't been through this, or step one doesn't apply to you, right? Because step one is the condition I'm admitting to. Relapse is inevitable. It's coming again. What makes me say that is because all the efforts I've placed in the past trying to keep me sober, our first obsession is ourselves, right? So those ideas that I could keep myself sober based on self-will, right? Even in Bill's story, he talked about that. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. How many people were hoping that was the answer, self-knowledge? Because then, right, because if you're not like us, then you really don't have to do this, do you? But if you got to a point where it's either find the solution or else die an alcoholic death, you kind of get your own attention based on the information that you're receiving, right? So from page 44 on, it starts talking about the human condition, right? And the challenge and the perplexities and how we reason, how we look at information, how we gather and act on that. And then they talk about there's something inside of us that governs us without realizing it. We're making decisions based on self, what later places us in a position to be hurt. Like, we're really good. Anybody really good here in hindsight? Foresight, not so much. Hindsight is like, oh yeah, right? But it still doesn't save us in the future. We seem to fall in the same jackpot all the time. That's where that unmanaged, if you can't keep yourself sober, right? We think we're successful because we got 3 months, 6 months, or a year, and then we relapse again. I wouldn't lend somebody my car if they were getting in an accident every 3 months, every 6 months, or once a year. It's kind of like, nor would people rent them the car. So you kind of look at it that way. So as we start going through We Agnostics, we see it's the transition into step 3. It helps us navigate to a position where we're open to the solution that's being presented in step 2. Step 2 is an idea of a group of principles that if I was to apply those to my life, I would have the result that they're talking about. What's that? Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Does that kind of make sense? That's the solution to step 1. So the confirmation of step 1 is I continue to drink. right? The idea presented in step 2 is the psychic change or spiritual experience. Once I obtain it, I can recover from this condition that has me, I don't have it. And that's what the doctor talked about in the doctor's opinion, that they talk about this is repeated over and over. What is? Relapse. Even though we could stay sober sometimes for months or years, inevitably we find ourselves without defense against the first drink. Anybody? Anybody? Yeah, we've been there, done that, right? So by the time we get to how it works, we've answered certain questions. We know what the problem is in great detail. We have the collective understanding what the problem is. Yes? It's not my understanding. It's their understanding that I concur to, I concede to, I agree to. Then they outline the course of action, which is step 2, right? That as the result of these steps, I can have this experience as outlined in step 2, right? So the confirmation of the idea presented in step 2 is step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. There's one specific purpose for doing this course of action. Because if I don't recover, then I'm going to die an alcoholic death. Right? So, and then when we went through the spiritual appendix in the back of the book, they talked about what this change looks like, a transformation change that happens in a short period of time that we can't bring about by ourselves. They talk about it would take years to bring about the same results that we see other people getting in a short period of time through the educational variety. Why we can't go years is because of the malady that centers in the mind as the second symptom in alcoholism, right? So there's 2 symptoms. Nobody cares to admit they're bodily and mentally different from their fellows. Other people teach there's 3. The book doesn't support that idea, right? And so here we go. So by the time we get to how it works, we understand what the problem is, we understand what the solution is, we understand where we make this contact, where we make this beginning is deep down within, where they talk about on page 55. We also know what the purpose of this book now is to enable us to find a power greater than ourselves, which will solve our problem. We haven't had that yet, but we believing, or willing to believe, like Bill did sitting at the kitchen table, if I just did what Evie did, and I was willing to do the same course, I might build what I saw in my friend. Remember that conversation? That's what step 2 is basically. If I do this thing the way the people did it that went before me, what is the likelihood of me getting this thing? Well, here we go, how it works. It talks about rarely have we seen a person fail, page 58. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Whose path? Their path. Right? That's laid out where? In the first portion. Not the first 164 pages that we hear people make reference to. The first portion, which includes the forewords, includes the doctor's opinion, includes the spiritual appendix in the back of the book, because without the history and idea why this was put together and for who it was put together, we'd be missing information. So when they talked about there is a solution, it talked about when we're properly armed with facts about ourselves, right? We could generally win the confidence of another alcoholic. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be done. Meaning, if I don't fully comprehend what I'm up against, then any solution will make sense. Right? The pursuit of self. Here, they're very specific now, right? They're going to show us how they recovered what? Specifically, right? The purpose of this book is to enable us to find a power greater than ourselves. So we just need to be willing to continue moving on. But they talked about our biggest challenges ourselves, right? Like, you have the gift of desperation isn't enough to create change. It stays a gift of desperation unless there's a solution. What makes you say that? Well, how many times did Bill go to treatment? He went 3 times from what they talk about in the book, right? What was the difference? The 3rd time he applied a solution. And that's the same with us within the fellowship. We can come back to meetings, go to all the meetings in the world, unless we understand what type of alcoholic we are and the solution that we need to apply to ourselves to get connection to this power that creates this change, we continue to relapse. Yes? But the only one that don't know is us. Right? So that's kind of like, is there somebody else here we can talk to? No, that's what the book is about, right? So the path that they talked about makes reference back to during the Second World War. There would be people, their job was to go through the field or go through the snow and find out where the landmines were. And they'd put flags up. And there would be footprints going through the field. And if they followed that path exactly, what would be the likelihood they would get through it? 100%. So that's why they talk about rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. And then they'll get into that thoroughness as we go along. But we are our biggest challenge. And without help is too much for us. And they'll get into that in a second. Without realizing it, my last relapse, I did 360 meetings in 90 days, and I had a 3-month chip in my pocket, and I was drinking an hour later. My liver was kind of popped out of my side a bit. I was turning a bit of jaundice. I was vomiting green bile. I was dying of alcoholism in AA, of all places to be dying of alcoholism. Right? So this guy who started working with me without my permission, consent, he took interest in me because he realized his responsibility was to carry this message to the alcoholic who still suffers. It wasn't my responsibility to find it. I would never find it because the things that made sense to me were the things that were killing me. The things that he was presenting, I was having a hard time with it. I'm probably the only one here, right? But when the alternative was get this thing or die, it kind of got my attention. So when he said, Tony, when they talk about here and how it works, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. He goes, what do they mean by that? I showed him a directory of the meeting guides in Vancouver, and I said 90 meetings in 90 days. I had nothing else to go with. That's what I thought. Meeting makers make it. How many people heard that? Right? Why do people get drunk? They stop going to meetings, this and that. So it was a human element of keeping self sober without realizing it, applying self to self, right? And so that's still stage 1 recovery. Stage 2 recovery is having an experience as the result of something other than me. I haven't had that at this point in time. So then they talk about here, those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. So we don't get into the argument whether we recover or don't recover. Those who have been through the book or are properly armed with facts about themselves and understand what they mean by that, we understand we have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. We still have the human perplexities that they talked about in We Agnostics. Right? In there they say, why shouldn't we apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our mind? We think we apply these principles to alcoholism. We already admitted in step 1 it was beyond our pay grade. Right? I don't treat alcoholism. We have a solution for it. Big difference. Right? So they talk about here, those who do not recover. So people who say, we're always recovering or we don't recover, just told you they haven't been through this. Because if you've been through this and you understand what type of alcoholic you know you need to recover from this condition, otherwise you're going to die an alcoholic death. Pretty simple. No argument. For us, we need to recover. We need to have this vital spiritual experience or else, right? So, then they talk about usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. So far, what did they ask us to be honest with? The characteristics and symptoms of alcoholism. As I look back over my life, have I exhibited these characteristics, this problem, or these symptoms? Yeah. Okay, that's it. Why they don't ask us more? Because we're going to start manipulating and lying. How do you know when an alcoholic is lying? Their lips start moving. I have had people go, how do I get my husband or wife to stop lying? They're new, right? I said, stop asking them questions. They don't know why they're doing what they're doing. They're going to try to make sense of why they're making an excuse for it. How many people's relapsed and tied an excuse to it? Right? But once you understand this, we realize why we relapse is because we're still afflicted with the illness. It's something we can't see, feel, and touch. And when it becomes present, we think about after we're having a drink, not before. And sometimes even when we think it's not a smart idea, it doesn't stop us from doing it. Anybody remember Jim? Remember Fred? Remember, the guy on page 26, a certain businessman? All these examples. Remember Bill? All these examples are people who thought they wouldn't drink again who drank again. But when they had the step 1 experience, they found the realization that they couldn't be their own solution. So when Ebby was talking to Bill, it put him in a position of neutrality to accept what was being presented. It was either die an alcoholic death or try to do what his friend was presenting. And then we seen this miracle that took place in the town's hospital that the Dr. Silkworth kind of witnessed. And he got Bill started working with other alcoholics of his description that were beyond his ability to help. So he welcomed this movement that started to happen. So then they talk about constitution capable of being honest. They're such unfortunates. They're not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They're naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. So as we go forward from here, the first is the inventory, the process of discovering the honesty of why the things happen the way they happen, who I involved, who I hurt. And then it talks about discussing with another human being. Then it talks about starting to make amends for these things and developing and helping other people. Developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. So if you're anything like me, I thought I was one of those persons who is naturally incapable of being honest with themselves. How many people have thought, oh, that's me? I'm naturally incapable of being honest with myself. So I went to my sponsor. I said, maybe I'm one of those few unfortunates. He says, why is that? Of the inability to be honest with myself. He says, well, if you were like that, then you wouldn't have came to that conclusion. So I outed my, right? I wouldn't be able to be honest that I was of that type, right? So he says, maybe you're going to have to do the steps. Participate in the saving of your own life. I hope it was lottery sobriety picked me, and that was it. That was all I'd have to do. And if page 417, acceptance was the answer to all my problems, they would have changed how it works by now, don't you think? It's interesting, right? So we see how the mind could trick itself. But when you're armed with facts about yourself, we realize there's a specific solution to a specific problem. Now, after I've gone through this process and I want to practice all these different ideas or principles, I'll be much able to do so as the result of my connection to something greater than myself, giving me the power to overcome self. Right? Until then, I fall victim to self all the time. Anybody prey to misery and depression? The bedevilments, they arise out of ourselves, right? But that's a topic for a different day. So then they talk about here, their chances are less than ever. There are those too who suffer from grave mental disorders. Many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. So my sponsor, Chuck, back in 1990, right, I guess over 89, they used to read How It Works, and he used to point at me. There are those two. He'd go 1, 2. Me and Tom, he'd go 1, 2. There are those two, right, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorder. My cheese and cracker weren't even on the same plate. I mean, like, I was out there. So I was always trying to deal with all these other problems, but I would never be able to find a solution for it because the base that I was starting from didn't have the power necessary to create the change I was hoping for. So I hear all these other people talk about this change that they were experiencing. I was trying to create the change in my life the way they were, but I was missing the element of this connection with something greater than me that allowed me to achieve that or experience it. Does that kind of make sense? So it was interesting. Good sponsorship is really helpful, right? One with a good sense of humor. Our stories disclose in a general way, this is important, what we used to be like, not what it was like, what we used to be like. So in Bill's story and all the examples, it talks about people when they took a drink, the phenomenon of craving, and the inability to stay sober. That's what we were like, right? What happened is the spiritual experience, right? Is the spiritual experience enabling me to have a different experience. And what I'm like now as the result of living these principles is we see that in Bill's story. We see what he was like, the inability to change. Ebby presented him. They both sat at the kitchen table. He conceded to step one. He listened to the solution that Ebby was presenting to him to his problem. He went through the course of action. And we've seen after he left the hospital, he had a group of principles that kept him connected to a power greater than himself, enabled him to go through the human dilemmas of depression, resentment, self-pity, right? These perplexities were before he would find himself drinking, but now he's able to have a different experience by going to work with other people, which makes no sense whatsoever, but it's a part of our recipe. Step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message. What message? The spiritual experience. That's what happened. Until that happens, the doctor talks about we continue to drink. And it's confusing because we can go months or years given good reason. But there comes a time when we're without defense against that first drink. That's why they close more about alcoholism. They say once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Neither he or any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a power greater than himself. And for those of us who've been sober for a while, understand that. Bill understands that, right? Those of us who start getting longevity and having a different experience, not different understanding, a different experience, something changes us from the inside out. We're inwardly rearranged, as Bill noticed with Ebby, as the doctor noticed with Bill, as the spiritual appendix talks about. All our members have tapped into an inner resource, right, that creates this change, right? So it's really good. This is the recipe for an experience, right? So it's pretty cool. So, and they talk about what happened and what we're like now. And they talk about here, blah, 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 blah. If you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, what is it that we have? We have a spiritual answer to this dilemma of alcoholism, right? A lot of people say it's the steps. I know a lot of people that work the steps who don't have this experience. It's about the experience. It's not about working the steps. The steps are a vehicle to get the experience. Once you have the experience, they talk about practicing these principles and cultivating this relationship. We're having a different experience, right? What's the purpose of the steps is to get connected to this power. Yes, what's the purpose of the principles is to cultivate that. How I explain it is, there's a big difference between needing to get a job and having a job. Right? At this point in time, I need to have this spiritual experience, getting it and then keeping it. Right? So once getting a job takes a lot of effort. Anybody here, resume, hitting payment, a lot of effort. But once you got a job, it's not the same effort that you need to apply. Is how do I keep it now? That's like the steps. The steps are to get this experience, and then how do I keep it, which is practicing these principles in all our affairs, right? The principles we've set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. It's a mind shift of my relationship with something greater than me instead of my relationship with me. I know the difference now, right? I don't know why I went there, but I went there. So, well, then you're ready to take certain steps. So some people thought they meant you get like Burger King sobriety, right? Drive-through. I could do this with certain steps. No, it means certain steps specifically to what they laid out in their experience. They're going to show us what they did, and if we want what they, right, the experience that they have, and I want the collective experience, I need to do what they did. It's not singular, it's collective. Even the solution is collective. All our members have had this experience as the result of this course of action. So that means I need to get engaged in it within a way. I've never met anybody who's ever done this, who's ever maintained it, who's ever relapsed. In the last 36 years, I'm coming up to 37, I've never met one person who's ever, right? I've met people incapable of going through this, but those who were able to go through it and have this experience and maintain it have ever relapsed. I've met people who made a good beginning, who stopped doing this, and the insanity returns. That's why they call it a daily reprieve. When does the daily reprieve happen? After the spiritual experience. Just because you're here doesn't mean you're experiencing a daily reprieve, right? You're in between drinks without knowing it, right? Because this thing's lying dormant. I need to have this change in order to be free of the thing that has me, right? So anyways, we'll keep that for another time. So as they go through this, some of these we balked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way. How many people were hoping? I'm reading the book, pick up the rock, drop the rock. Oh my God, I'm smoking rock. It's like, there's all these other methods, right? And they talked about that in the spiritual and more about, and we agnostics. If a mere code or better philosophy of life were sufficient for us to recover from alcohol, a lot of us would have recovered long ago. How many people have been spending a lot of effort working on themselves, trying to change themselves, trying to have a different experience, different outlook? I'm working on this, I'm working on that, and geez, none of it seems to be working. Because the illness of alcoholism is something you can't work on. It's either present or removed. Right? So the first thing I need to experience is this change that removes the problem. Then I'm left with the human perplexities that I apply these principles to. Right? So here we go. So they talked about, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. All the ideas and how I'm going to keep myself sober this time, how it's going to be different, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I've never met any new person who's ever come back and said, you know what, I really need to do the steps to have this experience. They come back, they get asked to share in a meeting, including me, and I talk about all the things I'm going to do different this time. Self-based ideas. Right? And so when we carry this message, what message are we carrying is the ideas contained in here. If you read Working with Others, it outlines the process that we need to go through in helping other people so they can find the same thing that we have found. Very specific. So this is interesting. The result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, and powerful. Without help, it was too much for us. What's the most important word there? You bring that up at a meeting, a topic meeting, and it's interesting. Everybody talks about, oh, remember it's cunning, remember it's baffling. No, the most important word there is remember, that we can't remember. Remember? Because if you could remember, then you wouldn't be powerless, then you wouldn't need a psychic change, and then you could be your own solution. So remember, you can't remember. Remember, well, what makes you say that? Look back over your drinking history. How well have you been able to keep you sober based on necessity? Warning of Dr. Biz. How many people's looked at me? I gotta stop. I'm snot running out of your nose. Regretful, just kind of ashamed and bewildered of the stuff that you've done or gotten into or the havoc that you've created. Anybody stop me anytime now. That's our story, right? It gets more horrific and the people around us stop talking to us because they don't know what to say to us anymore. Right? And you come to a meeting and you're surrounded by hopefully people that kind of understand where you're coming from. And we started the Me Too movement way before anybody else did. So anyways, without help, it was too much for us, right? But there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. And if you've been through We Agnostics, you're okay with the wording because you have your own conception. The conception meaning the idea that if I do this course of action, I'll get this experience. So whether I call it creative intelligence, it's like having a phone, right? Whether it's a BlackBerry, whether it's a Samsung, whether it's a Apple is secondary. Does it have all the functions that you're looking for, enable you to be and enjoy the usage of it? Does that kind of make sense? If I show a phone and I say lack of power is my dilemma, we know that there's universal chargers now. We'll charge any phone. And that's kind of like us. We have a universal charger, a universal power that we could get access to that challenges or gives us the power to overcome ourselves, which is pretty good, allowing us to have a different experience from the inside out, experience peace, happiness, and contentment. So then they talk about here, half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. Who did? They did. They're telling us their process and everything they went through and the challenges they had and the stumbling blocks. So how it works talks about on this side of it, how hooped they are, and the end result is you're not going to get this thing if these stumbling blocks are still in place. How do I navigate through those things? So I need to be willing. They talk about here are the steps we took, who took, they took, which is suggested as a program of recovery. So they broke down a summary of the course of action they took. So the first step is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. They're talking past tense, not present tense. Right? So if you're new, you're experiencing present tense. You are. They were. they have a solution. And then they talk about the course of action they went through. Step 12 on the next page talks about here. Step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result. A lot of people say a result. Does it change the whole purpose and meaning of the intent of what we're hoping to achieve? Right? So we realize I need to have this experience, otherwise my fate's going to be continuous. Whether I agree with it or not, relapse is coming. Right? Anybody story ought to experience that. But look at what all the stuff I'm doing. Are you doing something that gets you connected to something greater than yourself? Right? So they talk about having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. We try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Notice it didn't say steps, these principles. So probably by now I've said a half a dozen things that creating people to have arguments within their own mind. Right? Because you're on the other side of the steps. I'm talking about being on this side of it. And the conflict that we have with ourselves, the old ideas, how we look at things, and our reasoning. So a lot of us argue with ourselves and don't realize you're not arguing with us. You need to know what we're talking about in order to argue with us. You're arguing with what you think we're saying and what you think you're hearing, but there's no argument here. We have a way at which we can all agree on. That's pretty interesting, eh? When they talk about being able to get this where it's palatable enough that we all agree on the basic principles. Those who put this together, over 100, and now in my 4th edition it says thousands. The story of how many thousands of alcoholics who have recovered from alcoholism. Recovered. So the story is what I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm like now. What makes me have the experience I'm having now is the course of action I took that got me connected to a power greater than myself. Well, where and how did I find this power? Well, that's what this book is about. So we see here, as the result of going through the rest of this book that they outline based on their experience, they had an experience that they're passing on to us. We could have the same experience if I'm willing to go to any lengths to get it. But I'm going to have a problem doing that, and I'm the problem. So I need somebody to help me navigate through how I create these scenarios in my mind to discredit what I need to do, thus working toward my demise instead of my betterment. So the people around me are trying to get me to participate in the saving of my own life, but I'm arguing about the color of the life jacket. Right? So it's interesting. So here we go. Many of us exclaimed, who? Those that put this together. Many of us exclaimed, what in order? I can't go through with it. How many people's read the steps on the wall, put your interpretation to them, and thought, what in order? I can't go through it. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing a 5th step. I'm not making amends. And you haven't even done step 1 yet, and you're arguing about the process that you haven't even started. Nobody in this fine group, though, right? I know that. You'll find it funny later. So, do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. Why? Because I'm involved. As long as I'm involved, there's going to be problems and challenges. Right? I'd have a perfect story if I wasn't the one involved in it. Right? So I have a new story, the story of Alcoholics Anonymous. So as the result, I have a pretty amazing story today, 36 years later. April 8th will be 36. Why? Because I have the story of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's the collective story. What an amazing story. I was dying of alcoholism. I wasn't going to see 29 or 30. At 27, somebody conned me into this course of action. I had an experience sufficient enough for me to feel the difference of something inside shifting enough that I was able to find moments of peace, happiness, and contentment. And I continued that through working with others. 36 years later, I have an amazing story. There's nobody more amazed with my story than me. Then there's my mom, and then there's my wife, and then there's my kids. They're amazed with my story too. Why? Because I have the story of Alcoholics Anonymous. I couldn't have created this story, but it was made available to me, and I was willing to go to any lengths. And some of them I balked, but I realized the outcome would be die an alcoholic death or show some humility, right? The crushing of pride, praying for some strength, and moving forward, right? So they talked about here No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to this principle. We're not saints. The point is that we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. So that means somewhere along the line, I have a gauge. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. So unless you had somebody that's been through this, I'd miss the whole point. The whole point is, after I finished my 4, I seen what Tony was like on a non-spiritual basis. Then I did my 5, and I got some connection without realizing I was getting connected. Then I did 6 and 7. I made my 8 list, and I got into 11 and 12 right away as I did my 9s. As I was getting jammed in, I went and worked with other people. I brought prayer. I didn't go anywhere unsupervised. I learned the disciplines as outlined in step 11. And somewhere along the line, there was sufficient change that other people started to notice before I did. And that's what they talk about in the spiritual appendix. More often, the people around us will experience the promises before we realize we're experiencing them, and they'll experience as the result of this new experience that we're having. They say there's something different about us, right? After a little while, they stop hugging us to smell if we reek of alcohol, right? After a little while, they start answering the phone after the first ring instead of letting it go to voicemail, right? After a while, people make themselves available to maybe hang out for a bit, right? Like my mom used to say, hey, we didn't need the police before you showed up, right? So the progress in my life would be when I got in conflict, was there any violence? Always violence. I was a walking, talking, meat-eating, knuckle-dragging Neanderthal, right? After this process, there was a pause in between what was happening internally and the involvement with other people. So I started to see that would be progress, where before there was, right? Or when I got a job, I was able to keep it longer. Or when I was engaged with people, there was less conflict everywhere I went, right? They weren't voting me out of groups in AA anymore. They weren't kicking me out of roundups. I wasn't getting barred from restaurants, sober. I wasn't pushing people down the street in my car, in their car, sober. Grabbing people in meetings. I stopped throwing chairs. And people said, well, there's something. So I went from setting chairs up all the, because they tried to give me the first job was a greeter when I came out here to Vancouver. I got into conflict with the third guy the way he was shaking my hand. So they said, Tony, just do chairs. Just do chairs for a while. And I couldn't even do that without conflict. Right? And then after a while, they let me do greeting. They let me represent GSR and intergroup, and I started doing all these. I started going to prisons. I started going to jails, correctional centers, hospitals, and stuff, working with people. People were engaged with me where before they would have nothing to do with me. Right? That would be the progress. Right? Not letting people know how I think and feel about them would be progress. For most of us, we strain the tongue. So, it's really amazing the things that happen here. So the 4 steps shows me what I'm like on self-will. After that, how we talk about with my sponsees and my sponsors, where's God in this? Would this thing be happening the way it's unfolding if there was the principle of prayer and your connection to something greater than you? And 90% of the time is, no, it wouldn't be unfolding this way. Would you be having the experience you're having if you had a little more prayer and serenity in your life? Oh, okay, I get what you're saying. So now I can understand when they talk about acceptance, surrender, letting go, because I have the principles in order to do that, because I have access to power, right? So it's not about how well I work the steps now. It's not about working the steps. It's how connected am I as I go through the day? Am I connected to something greater? Do I start my morning off? When I do my review at night, am I seeing where I fell short of the day? Every time I fall short in the day is because I've gone it alone. I've made a decision based on self that I'll take it from here without realizing it. When I do my step 11 and review at night, I ask what corrective measures I could take not to have this experience anymore. that means, how could I bring God into this? How could I pause, ask for direction, and move in a new thing? So progress here is the acknowledgement that there's something happening, the stepping back to take assessment, what's creating it, and looking for spiritual principles to have a different result. So I've been married to my beautiful wife coming up to 17 years here, and every time we talked about finances, I would turn into a different person, and she would have anxiety, and I couldn't control my emotional nature. And I didn't like the way I was making her feel. She didn't want to talk about finances anymore. So I did a review and said, I see here this instinct, that instinct, the stuff I learned in step 4 is the foundation for step 11, right? So when I did the review, I see all my instincts were acting up. So I asked what corrective measures I could take. So in prayer, it says, well, acknowledge what's happening. Let your wife know that you want to have a different experience. When it starts to happen, pause, that you both pray. Make an appointment with her with this stuff so you're mentally, spiritually prepared, right? That you could talk about this thing without having an instinct-based reaction. Bring God into it, right? And so now my wife goes, can I have some money? How much do you want? Write her a check. Right? There's no conflict around money. Now I go to her, how much do I owe you? How much do you owe me? What's the joint account? What's the house account? What do we need, right? And I just say, here you go. Like, I can't create that change. What created that change is my willingness to bring something greater than me into it through the experience that happens from within out. I don't know why I went there, but there you go. So, spiritual progress. Our description of the alcoholic. The chapter to the agnostic. So it kind of makes it important that you should have gone through that. I'm amazed at how many people, including me, in AA don't think we agnostics apply to them. It's the whole basis for the foundation for step 2 and 3. It's the preparation to move you into step 3. It gives you the stumbling blocks within your own mind and thinking that helps you navigate through that to come back to a basics. It's kind of like, anybody ever have a GPS? Been in a car with a GPS, right? You got to punch in where you're going. What's the second thing it does? Well, the first thing, once you punch in where you're going, it has that location. The first thing it does is, where are you starting from? It has to get your location in order to be successful to go where you're going. And as you go along the route, it kind of lets you know ahead of time, is there problems here or alternate routes? Or if you follow that GPS, God's prayer system, it gives you the same ability to do that. But most of us, we say, here's a shortcut, this way looks faster. And what does the GPS goes recalculating, and then after a while, it just takes you on a different route, right? So that's kind of like where we're in our lives, is get this internal thing happening where it kind of gives us guidance, and it's not based on self, it's giving us a different result, right? So coming back to the basis of this connection deep down within, right? That's the basis. That's my starting point. Maybe doing a serenity prayer. Maybe washing my face with cold water. Maybe calling my sponsor to come back to the basics. Help unscramble the scrambled eggs that are happening up there, right? Move from a self-based, instinct-based response to life to a spiritual base, right? And they talk about here, right? Made clear 3 pertinent ideas. And our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. Is what's that? Before and after what? Before and after this process, make clear 3 pertinent ideas. What's that? A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own life. Well, obviously you can't manage your own life if you're getting drunk all the time, can you? Would that make for an unmanageable life? You're spending the rent, you're spending the money, you're spending the support, you're spending the grocery money, you're in debt, you're in conflict, you're in agony, right? And we all been there, right? B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism, relieved the condition that has me drinking against my own will, right? That God could and would if he were sought. So what's it saying there? All I need to do is be willing. If we kind of go back to, that's a summary of what they talked on back on page 45, they talked about here, lack of power, that was our dilemma, right? Because look at all the times I've tried to change my life, all the efforts I've made from joining the gym to new girlfriends, to new jobs, to new locations, new this, new that, always creating the same story. My life always represented the effort that I made based on me. My life is my story. So I needed a new story. So they're talking about here, but I didn't have the power to create that. So they talk about on page 45, lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live. And it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how were we to find this power? Question mark. The question mark isn't for you to answer, they're going to answer it. Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem, not help you solve your problem, which will solve your problem, remove the very thing that's crippling you, right? And so as we go through this, and then they talk about, which is one of my two favorite pages, when you fully comprehend, page 54 talks about why we're having the experience we're having as human beings, why my life looks the way it does. And if I want it to look different, then it needs to change at a core level. I can't change it at that level because I don't have the recipe to see what's happening from the neck down that's making my decisions for me. Predetermined decisions, reactions, and determination to life based on my past and my present. They keep on determining my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions, right? So if you're mentally not right, guess what? Emotionally, you ain't going to be right. And if you're not emotionally right, then you're going to be in conflict with people, places, and things, and you're going to be sure they're more to blame. And you get to a certain point where you can't stand that anymore, and the insanity of alcohol returns, right? So I need to find a way to be able to go through this thing, to have a different experience without the conflict of being afflicted with alcoholism, right? So, page 55. They talk about this power. Actually, we're fooling ourselves. For deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by worship of other things, but in some form or other it is there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves and the miraculous demonstration of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we had for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found. It was so with us. The last analysis, meaning it's the last place I look, is where I find the answer, is deep down within. This is the last place I need to look, because once I get connected to it, there's no more seeking or looking. It's development. So, we could only clear the ground a bit. If our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, enables you to think honestly, encourage you to search diligently within yourself, if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. With this attitude, you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. Which is interesting, we can only clear the ground a bit. And then it shows up, this connection. Guess what the next step is? Making a decision to do step 4, the ground clearing, to have this experience. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. I love big book studies. If it was too much, we have a little question period for those who wish. We have the women's meetings Monday nights at 6. We have the home group Wednesdays at 7, same Zoom. We have the big book study workshop that me and Katie do on Thursdays at 7. There's one on Saturday, Leo does. And so that's kind of like the basis. We have a Facebook group that we have a fellowship on for those that wish to get involved there. And then, we have the 7th edition, and we have a question period. So live long and prosperous. May the force be with you. And how we close this meeting is with some outside help. What kind of help is the basis for a great life? We'll do the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. May the force be with you. Live long and prosperous.